Welcome everyone to another week of Ramban ala Parsha. This week we have the zchut to read Parshat Vaetchanan, which is slightly, confusing, not confusing thematically, but confusing in the sense that one of the big breaks in Parshat Dvarim happens in the middle of Parshat Vaetchanan. Meaning, the Ramban understands that the first 4+ prakim of Parshat of Sefer Dvarim, which gets us into Parshat Vaetchanan, is the introductory speech that Moshe Rabbeinu gave to Klal Yisrael. And then in the middle of the Parsha, in the middle of Perek Hey, the pasuk begins, Vayikra Moshe el Kol Yisrael Vayomer Alehem Shema Yisrael et hachukim ve'et hamishpatim asher anochi dover ba'oznechem hayom ulemadatem otam ushimartem la'asotam. That is the chukim u'mishpatim speech that's going to take us through till Perek Chav Hey or so of Dvarim, and you can check it in the Chumash, right? The introduction, Vayikra Moshe el Kol Yisrael. Again, there's no Vayidaber Hashem al Moshe anymore. We discussed that last week. The Ramban says that pasuk doesn't appear in Dvarim because God did not dictate this to Klal Yisrael. It's Moshe's speech. Okay, so before we get to the main speech, the parsha begins the way we know, Vaetchanan el Hashem ba'itahi le'mor. It's more tochacha, and it's more highlights of the history of Klal Yisrael. And then you have the beginning of Perek Daled. Va'ata Yisrael shma la chukim ve'la mishpatim asher anochi melamed etchem lasot. It's the introduction to the chukim u'mishpatim speech. Leman tichyu v'atem v'yirishtem et ha'aretz asher Hashem Elokei avotechem noten lachem. And then the Ramban will say the next pasuk is part of the introduction. Lo tosifu ala davar asher anochi mitzaveh etchem v'lo tigru mimanu. Right, the Issur D'Oraisa of Baal Tosif, adding to the Torah, and the Issur D'Oraisa of Baal Tigra, detracting from the Torah. Lishmod mitzvot Hashem Elokeichem asher anochi mitzaveh etchem. Right, so there are different sources for this, but the Ramban would say it belongs in our parsha because it's part of the introduction to the halachos that are going to begin in Perek Hey, in the next parak. So you need to know it's important. This is the Torah. Don't add and don't detract. And the Ramban right there, Pasuk Daled Perek Bet says, Lo Tosifu. First he quotes Rashi. Kigon, Chamesh Parshiot Bitfilin, Chamisha Minim Bilulav, Chamesh Tzitziot, V'chein Lo Tigru. Lashon Rashi. So says Rashi, and the Ramban's going to agree with this, but add to it. Rashi says, Baal Tosif and Baal Tigra relate to, for lack of better words, the Chefza Shel Mitzvah. If you add a 5th parsha to Tefillin, if you add a 5th species to the Daled Minim, if you add an extra, right? There's nothing wrong with having 5 corners in a baguette. You should know that. But if there's 5 corners, you put tzitzis on the 4 corners that are farthest from each other. To put tzitzis on a 5th corner, that's Baal Tosif. Okay? And then the Ramban says, V'kach amur b'sifrei minayin shelo tosif al halulav v'al hatzitzit Talmud lomar lo tosifu uminayim she'ein pochatin mehen Talmud lomar lo tigru. Okay, it supports Rashi. Minayin she'im patach levarech birkat kohanim lo yomar ho'ilu patachti levarech omar Hashem Elokei avotechem Yosef alachem kachem 1000 pa'amim v'yivarech etchem kasher diber lachem. I'm up here anyway. I'm blessing Klal Yisrael anyway. So in addition to Yivarecha, and the 3 brachos of Birchas Kohanim, why don't I say this beautiful pasuk from last week's parsha, from Parshas Dvarim? Says the Ramban, no, that's the same issue. Talmud lomar hadavar afilu davar lo tosif alav. Even if it's a Dvar Torah, you can add to Birchas Kohanim. Okay, so the definition of Baal Tosif for Rashi and for the Ramban is focused on the Chefza. But now, says the Ramban, but not only that, aval lo be'ela bilvad amru, ela af hayashen b'suka b'shmini b'kavana loke. Says the Ramban, if I sleep in the sukkah on Shmini Atzeres and I have in mind to be yotzei the mitzvah d'oraisa of yeshiva b'sukkah, says the Ramban, that's problematic. That's an Issur Torah of Baal Tosif. I'm adding on to the mitzvah. Okay, as the Gemara says, V'chein, im ya'aseh hachag shisha, if you decide that Sukkos, it's only 6 days. I'm not observing the 7th day of Sukkos. Over b'lav hazeh. Okay, then you'll be over on the Lotas say of Baltigra. Ulefi dati. Now the Ramban's going to expand on this. And I want to make clear, I don't know that Rashi disagrees with this. He just doesn't address it. Says the Ramban. Ulefi dati afilu bada lasot mitzvah bifnei atzma. Kigon she'asa chag b'chodesh shebada milibo kiravam. Let's say you decide to make a new yontif. It's not written anyplace. We'll come back to this in a second. Says the Ramban, that would be Bal Tosif. Okay, so first of all, you see this sometimes with people arguing against Yom Ha'atzmaut and Yom Yerushalayim. Ooh, it's Bal Tosif, you're adding a yontif. So obviously, it's not. First of all, there's no Isser Malacha, which is the key to adding something to the Torah. And second of all, of course you're allowed to add a holiday. You just can't claim that the holiday is Minat Torah. In fact, if you look in Malachim, where the Ramban's quoting from, the Chag that Badam Milibo, I'm in Malachim, Perek Yud Bet, Vayiven Yeravam et Shechem Bahar Ephraim, Vayeshev Bo, Vayetzei Misham Vayiven et Pnuel, right? Yeravam is the new Melech Yisrael. Vayoma Yeravam Belibo, Ata Tashuva Mamlacha LeBeit David. Says Yeravam, if they go back, what will happen? Im Ya'aleha Am Hazel Lasot Zvachim B'Beit Hashem B'Yushalayim, V'shav Lev Ha'am Hazel Adonehem El Rechava Melech Yehuda, V'haraguni, V'shavu El Rechava Melech Yehuda. If they go to the Harabayis for the Shalosh Regalim, they're going to realize that Rechavam is the real king. And they'll come back and they'll kill me. And so he makes Kruvim, whatever, it's embarrassing. Vayas Yeravam Chag B'Chodesh HaShemini in Kislev, B'Chamisha Yom LaChodesh Kechag Asher B'Yehuda. Vayal al HaMizbech Kein Asa B'Veit El L'Zabech La'agalim Asher Asa, Ve'amid B'Veit El Ad Kohanei Abamot Asher Asa. He made a yontif exactly like the Yomim Tovim that the Torah gives us. So says the Ramban, that's Bal Tosif. You can't just make up a yontif. V'kach amru linyan mikra Megillah. And now the Ramban is going to talk about the famous Gemara in Megillah. Me'o shmonim neviim amdu lahem liYisrael. So first of all, it's not me'o shmonim neviim. All the footnotes point out it's a scrivener's error in the Ramban. It's arba'im u'shmona neviim. How they got there is an interesting thing, but don't worry about it. Amdu lahem liYisrael v'lo pichasu v'lo hosifu al ma shekatuv b'Torah. Afilu otachat chutz mi mikra Megillah. Right? The Gemara there says, the Nevi'im were lamenting this. Mordechai and Esther want to introduce a new mitzvah into the Torah. Maybe they want to introduce a whole yontif. They wanted to introduce certainly a whole mitzvah of Kriyas HaMegillah. So says the Gemara, the Amorim were upset because they said 48 Nevi'im have come and gone. None of them had tried to add on to the Torah, and now you're trying to add on to the Torah. Okay, and he quotes the Yerushalmi that sort of supports them. In the Bavli says they had a kal v'chomer, right? Uma me'avdus lecheirus omrim halel. When the Jews left Egypt, they said halel. They weren't in the threat of death. They were just slaves. Mimi salachaim. Haman wanted to kill all the Jews, and they were saved. Lo kol shekain. Okay, so they had a kal v'chomer. Rav Lichtenstein once said, "What if they didn't have a kal v'chomer? They wouldn't have celebrated Purim. It would have been different, but of course they would have celebrated Purim." Okay, so that's the Ramban. So he says there too, if they didn't have a makar, then adding Kriyas HaMegillah would have been Bal Tosif. It really would, as strange as it sounds to us. So Kach Amar Lanu Moshe. So therefore, that's what Moshe Rabbeinu is saying to us now. Ve'ein navi acher atid lechadesh davar lachem. A navi is not allowed to add to the Torah. Umordechai ve'Esther rotzim lechadesh lanu davar. They want to add to the Torah. Lo zazu misham nosim v'notim b'davar ad shehishir HaKadosh Baruch Hu ad sheheir HaKadosh Baruch Hu einayim. Till HaKadosh Baruch Hu found a makar for celebrating Purim. Hare shahaita hamitzvah hazo asura lahem. It would have been usher to add something to the Torah. Im kain hi bichlal lo tosif alav. Ela shelo lamadu lemosif al pi navi. Ela min hakatuv shamar ela hamitzvot. Ein navi rashay lechadesh bo davar me'ata. So it's actually interesting. If you're a navi, we're more suspicious of you. If I announced the Yom Tov, nobody would take it seriously, and everyone would understand I made up something on my own. But if you're a navi, there's a reason to suspect that which you're introducing is really that which HaKadosh Baruch Hu told you. And Nevi'im, Mordechai and Esther were not Nevi'im. but they lived in a time at the end of the Tkufat HaNevi'im. There were Nevi'im at the time, maybe Chagai, Zechariah, and Malachi, and therefore Chazal needed to be more careful not to add anything to the Torah. Uma shetiknu chachamim mishum geder, k'gon shniot la'arayot u'kiyotze bahen, zehi mitzvah min haTorah, u'bilvad sheyeda shehe mishum hageder hazeh, ve'einan mipi HaKadosh Baruch Hu ba'Torah. So the Ramban hints to something here, which the Rambam is going to pick up on. Obviously, the Rambam came before the Ramban, but the idea is there's a difference between D'Rabbanans and D'Oraisas. And here, I'm going to read to you from a Rambam in Hilchos Mamrim, Perek Bet Halacha Tet. It's a fantastic Rambam, and you won't believe how the Rambam defines Baal Tosef. Keitzad, Harei Katuv Ba'Torah Lo Tuvashel Gedi B'Chalev Imo. Right? The Torah says you can't eat meat and milk. Mipi Shmuel Amdu Shezeh Katuv Asur Levashel V'Le'echol Basar B'Chalav. Okay, so that answers meat and milk. Bein Basar Behema, Bein Basar Chaya, Aval Basar Ha'of, Mutar B'Chalav Min HaTorah. Mid'oraisa, says the Rambam, I could eat chicken and milk. It's the Rabbanan that prohibited it, but mid'oraisa I could do it. Okay, Im Yavo Beitin V'Yatir Basar Chaya B'Chalav Harei Goreya. If Bezdin says you can eat a wild animal with milk, that's a violation of Baal Tigra, because you're detracting from the Torah. But here's the more important point. Vim ye'asor basar ha'of, v'yomar shehu bichlal hagidi, v'u asur min ha'torah, harei ze mosif. Says the Rambam, it's fantastic, because all of us grew up knowing, of course, it's asur to eat chicken with milk. And it is also to eat chicken with milk. But says the Rambam, that's a D'Rabbanan. Mid'oraisa, you can eat chicken with milk. If you say chicken with milk is also mid'oraisa, says the Rambam, that's the Isur D'Oraisa of Baal Tosef. It's important to know, and the Ramban hints at this, but the Rambam really brings it home. It's important to know there's a difference between D'Oraisas and the Rabbanans. Yes, we treat them the same, and in the Shulchan Aruch there's no distinction between D'Oraisas and the Rabbanans. But philosophically, it's important to know what comes from the Torah, and what's a Geder, and what's a Harchaka. And it reminds me, when sometimes you hear people saying, having a smartphone is an Isur D'Oraisa, I think, yes, it's an Isur D'Oraisa to say that, because that's Baal Tosef. You could say it's an Isur D'Rabbanan, you could say it's a Harchaka, you could say it's a Gzeira, but you can't say that something that's not in the Torah is an Isur D'Oraisa, is an Isur Torah. That's prohibited because of the Isur of Baal Tosef. It's important to know what was Asur from the Torah. Likewise, it's important to know what was Asur Midrabanan. Okay, now, the Psukim go on, and still in the introduction, in Pasuk Tezvav, the Torah says, "V'nishmartem ma'od lenafshotechem, ki lo ri'item kol timuna biyom diber Hashem aleichem b'chorev mitoch ha'esh." And it's interesting, I think here the Torah is picking up on something important. Says the Ramban, "Yazhireim pen yitu achar hakol asher shamu, v'yasu hashchata likatzetz b'netiyot." Right, likatzetz b'netiyot is a term from the Gemara in Chagiga. It means to become an apostate. So the Ramban, and we did this last year, the Ramban talks about the experience of Maimon Har Sinai as being an individual experience of Nevuah. All of Klal Yisrael were prophets at the time of Har Sinai. They heard HaKadosh Baruch Hu speak to them directly. And the Ramban, unlike Rashi, thinks they heard him speak all 10 of the Dibrot. So of course then it becomes a risk. Because if I was a Navi at some point, I might lead myself to believe that I continued being a Navi and that I'm really hearing HaKadosh Baruch Hu's voice. And that's not right. And that might cause me to be mikatzetz b'netiyot, to become an apostate. Right, so it's prohibited to make any type of idol, which might be something you could mistake for speaking to you. Okay, now next point. Okay, then it says you shouldn't make any picture of HaKadosh Baruch Hu kiviyachol. Again, tied to this idea that you might otherwise mistake a voice that you hear to be the voice of God. Why might you mistake that? Because you experienced it at Har Sinai. Now the Ramban continues here, and it's a really, really big point in the Ramban. Ukvar Pei Rashi, he says, the Pasuk says later in our parak, Asher chalak Hashem Elokecha utcha l'chol ha'amim. The Pasuk is in Pasuk Yutes, and it says as follows. V'ra'ita upentisai necha hashamayim v'ra'ita hashemesh v'tarech v'takochavim kol tzua hashamayim v'nidachta v'ishtachavita lahem v'avaditam asher chalak Hashem Elokecha otam l'chol hamim tachat kol hashamayim. What's asher chalak Hashem Elokecha? God gave avodah zarah to goyim, but not to us. God apportioned these powers over the world. So shockingly, the Ramban says yes. Asher chalak Hashem Elokecha otcha l'chol hamim ki lechulam kochav umazal ugvohim alehem malchei elyon. Yes, says the Ramban, every nation in the world has a malach, has an angel that rules over that nation. Kigon ha'ne'emar b'Daniel sar malchut paras v'sar malchut yavan uba'avur kein ya'asu lahem Elohim mehem v'yavdum. And therefore, the Gentiles will make gods out of those angels and worship them. Va'amar ve'etchem lokach Hashem. God took us personally out of Mitzrayim. Ki itam chalak Hashem lo takimu alechem sar o ozer zulato. We are the exception to the rule. Says the Ramban, with respect to Am Yisrael, we are ruled over directly by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Ki hu otzi etchem mikor habazel. He took us out of the fiery furnace of Egypt. Shehayitem b'toch Mitzrayim bikur eish ve'itzim. You're in a furnace of fire and wood. V'otzi etchem misham kineged sarehem she'asa bahem shvatim. V'lulei shehipilam lo hayta yotzim ki hayu heim b'ma'alatam shelo teitzu. V'nei asa kol zeh kidei shetihiyu lo nachala v'tihiyu lishmo hagadol sigula mikol ha'amim. Says the Ramban, and he refers to this pasuk many, many times. Asher chalak Hashem Elokecha l'chol ha'amim means on some level, God really did give not avodah zarah, but angels to the Gentiles. And they are responsible directly. Obviously, they work for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and therefore it's avodah zarah to worship the Gentiles. But they have some authority, and they have some power, albeit power given by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But with respect to Am Yisrael, and here the Ramban expresses itself differently in a number of places. It could be Am Yisrael be'eretz Yisrael, and only they qualify for this purpose. Eretz Yisrael does not have a malach. It's not like Cincinnati or Los Angeles or Melbourne or London, right? They have a malach. The malach answers to God, but it works through an intermediary. But in Eretz Yisrael, for sure, it doesn't work that way. HaKadosh Baruch Hu has direct ownership of us, and therefore we're supposed to feel that, and we're supposed to, refer to or relate to HaKadosh Baruch Hu in a way that makes it clear that He has direct control over us. Okay, that's a big idea that plays out in many, many places in the Ramban, and we've seen it before, and we'll return to it again. Now, having done the introduction, now the Ramban begins in Perek Hey, the Chukim u'Mishpatim speech, and we did a lot of the Aseret HaDibrot last year. I think we did it well. But if you pick up in the middle of, there's a long Ramban, not that long. The first Ramban in Perek Hey, Pasuk Hey, the Ramban says, Va'ata yatchil b'mishneh Torah. Now, after the introductory 4+ prakim, we can start with Mishneh Torah, which is not every mitzvah that was given before, but a repetition of the key mitzvot. And obviously then it starts with Aseret HaDibrot, right? They're really, really important. Yomar lahem Aseret HaDibrot. Okay, fine. But now an important point. And that is, I've often asked myself, right? Chazal say, Zachor v'shamar b'dibur achad. Okay, but what did Klal Yisrael hear? What happened at Maimad Har Sinai? So here the Ramban really kind of expresses himself kind of clearly. V'lo shana v'lo bi'er klum ba'anochi Hashem v'lo yelecha Elohim achrim al panai. Says the Ramban, the first two dibros are word for word what they were in Parshas Yisro when we got the Aseret HaDibros. Now, what happens after that? Ki mipi advur shema'um. We heard it from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. V'chein b'dibur hashlishi mipnei shekvar amar et shem Hashem Elokecha k'mo sheperashti b'seder kedoshim tihiyu. V'hitchil leva'er lahem shamor b'makom zachor al derech hapshat. Says the Ramban, when Moshe Rabbeinu in the second Luchot said Shamor Yom HaShabbat Lekadsho, which is different than the first Luchot, which says Zachor Yom HaShabbat Lekadsho, says the Ramban, he wasn't giving us an alternative Aseret HaDibros. He was giving us an explanation of what the word Zachor means. Va'aldat Rabotenu b'dibur achad nemru. Okay, he recognized that Chazal say it was said at the same time. Ubier lohem zeh ki heim kulam yodim zachar v'hu yodiem ki shamor ne'emar imo. So the Ramban here is revealing that the text of the first dibrot, the text of the first luchot that were given on Har Sinai at Parshas Yisro, that's the authentic text. Moshe Rabbeinu made some changes and made some explanations for the pshat, so that Bnei Yisrael will understand exactly what's going on. Anytime there was a doubt about what something meant, Moshe Rabbeinu explained it. And that's the text of the Aseret HaDibrot in Vaetchanan. But it's not the authentic text. Now, that's a big machlokas harishonim. There are many, many people who disagree with the Ramban, but I think it's significant to know that in the Ramban's pshat, the text, the authentic text of Aseret HaDibrot was given in Yitro. What's given in Vaetchanan is Moshe Rabbeinu's explanation of certain things in the text that may have otherwise been unclear. Oh, okay. Now, I skipped one Ramban. I want to quickly try to do two more if we have time. The Ramban is bothered by what the Arei Miklat are doing before the Aseret HaDibrot. Before the big speech starts, before the Chukim Mishpatim speech starts, you have at the end of Perek Mem Aleph, at the end of Perek Daled, Pasuk Mem Aleph, Oz Yavdil Moshe Shalosh Arim, right? Moshe is going to separate the Arei Miklat. Now, the Ibn Ezra there says, yeah, Moshe happened to separate the Arei Miklat on the same day that he told them the Divrei Abrit. And the Ramban is upset by this. Ve'ino nachon. Aval hu k'pshuto. It's an amazing pshat, says the Ramban. Ki Moshe asaf kol Yisrael leva'er lohem haTorah. He gathered all of Klal Yisrael, right? The speech in Devarim, he gathered all of Klal Yisrael for the opening speech. Upatach lahem b'divrei tochachot. And in that speech, he gave us tochacha. He gave us musar. He pointed out mistakes we'd made, averos that we've done. V'ka'asher amar b'fnei tochachot b'ma she'asu v'azharot al avodat gilulim v'al yichud Hashem v'hishlim lahem sheyishmeru chukavu mitzvotav l'man yitav lahem. Right, Moshe Rabbeinu ends on a positive note. We have to keep the Torah, we have to keep the mitzvahs, we have to worship HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Oz amar b'ma'amadam lifnehem ata mikayem hamitzvah kasher tzivanu Hashem. Moshe Rabbeinu, having worked them up and gotten them all motivated, said, okay, right now, let's do a mitzvah. I'm so in love with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I so believe in Am Yisrael. I so believe that we're going to go into Eretz Yisrael. You're going to go into Eretz Yisrael. And everything is going to be great. Right now, I want to do a mitzvah. And he was Mavdil Shalosh Arim. And the Ramban goes on. We won't have time to do it inside. The Ramban goes on to say he knew it wasn't really the completion of the mitzvah. Why? Because the three Arei Miklat in Ever Hayarden weren't collate until the three Arei Miklat in Eretz Yisrael were separated. And that wasn't going to be done until Yoshua entered the land and separated them. All six Arei Miklat worked together. But says the Ramban, but Moshe Rabbeinu was so excited, having given the speech and having told Bnei Yisrael how important it is to keep the Torah, how important it is to keep the mitzvahs. Moshe Rabbeinu said, I'm going to show you an example. Right now, I'm going to begin a mitzvah, which is to separate the Arei Miklat. It's a mitzvah that God gave me. I know it's a mitzvah that I can't complete because I need to enter Eretz Yisrael to do so, and I'm never going to enter Eretz Yisrael. Nevertheless, I'm going to do it. It really, really gives you like a sense for the excitement that Moshe Rabbeinu had for the power of the speech, and just very quickly explain something else, right? Everybody says the following pasuk. I have to find it. V'zot ha-Torah shesam Moshe l'fnei bnei Yisrael. Are miklat are the Torah? No. This is the end of the speech. V'zot ha-Torah. All of these things are what HaKadosh Baruch Hu put before bnei Yisrael. That may also be in the Gemara a source for Baal Tosef and Baal Tigras. Zos ha-Torah. Not more, not less. And then Eila ha'idot v'achukim v'mishpatim asher diber Moshe bnei Yisrael b'tzeitam Mitzrayim. That's the end of the speech. So it's not that Arei Miklat are the Torah. Arei Miklat is the mitzvah that Moshe did at the beginning of the opening speech as a result of how excited he was to give Bnei Yisrael the Torah, as how excited he was going to be for all of Sefer Dvarim, and therefore he was Mavd Az Yavdil Moshe Shalosh Arim. Okay, very last point. In the main speech, in this week's parsha, in Perek Hey, Pasuk Chavav, the Ramban says something fascinating. First, the Torah says, in Perek Hey, Pasuk Chavav, I'm obviously just stalling till I find it. The Torah says, Mi yitain v'haya levavam ze lahem lira'oti v'lishmor et kol mitzvotai kol hayamim l'ma'an yitav lahem v'livnehem lo'olam. Right, we're right after Aser Sadibros. It's still the introduction to the speech. The next thing that's going to happen is Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. But you have this strange pasuk. Mi yitain, says God, I wish. So the Ramban is bothered, and all of us should be bothered. Why is God wishing? If God wished it, He could make it happen. Why does He have to hope? I wish they would worship me. Why is that? So says the Ramban, Ba'avur heyot rishut ha'adam biyado lehatztik uleharshia. Says the Ramban, it comes back to the fundamental premise of the Torah and of Klal Yisrael and of our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is Bechira Chavshis. Ba'avur heyot rishut ha'adam biyado lehatztik uleharshia. Since God created us with free will, it means I can be a tzaddik and I can be a rasha. V'hakol bidei shamayim chutz miyirat shamayim. And God, again, I have to say this in a way that's careful. God either limits Himself or God is limited by the world that He created. But once the premise of the world is bechira chavshis, so hakol bidei shamayim chutz miyirat shamayim. It's true. God cannot make me fear Him. It should be the easiest thing in the world for me to fear God, and God could do that to me in a second. But God has made a world in which He doesn't have the power. Now again, He could have the power if He wanted, but He made a world in which He has limited Himself. And in the world in which He's limited Himself, He cannot give me yiras shamayim. Yomar hakatuv kain, V'hu kilashon b'nei Adam. Says the Ramban, Dibra Torah b'lashon b'nei Adam. The Torah is talking as if HaKadosh Baruch Hu is a person. Umi yitein v'haya levavam zeh. How much do I wish that all these great things happen to me? How much do I wish that we won the war and we could go back to living in a world of peace? How much do I wish all these things? That's how human beings talk. And says the Ramban, the Torah writes it as if HaKadosh Baruch Hu is a human being, or that Torah writes it in a way that human beings would say it, because kiviyachol, in this way HaKadosh Baruch Hu is a human being, since He's limited Himself, and He's limited His ability to impact our free will, so it is proper for the Torah to say these words, Umi yitain v'hayalev avam zelohem liroti. Okay, those are the Rambans for today. We did the speech, we did Baal Tosef, we spent a lot of time on Baal Tosef, and the fascinating shita of the Rambam, right, which is, it's not just making a new yontif, claiming that a d'Rabbanan, in that case, chicken and milk, is asur min Torah, is the isur d'oraisa of Baal Tosef. Okay, we saw that Aser Sadibros, we saw fascinatingly the Ramban's take, that the first text in Yitro is the real text, and that in Vaetchanan, it's just Moshe's Perush. Okay, many people disagree with that, but that's a fascinating text. And finally, we saw that separating the Arei Miklat was really just out of Moshe's excitement to do a mitzvah, having given the speech and about the importance of worshiping HaKadosh Baruch Hu and the importance of Torah mitzvahs and the importance of Chukim and Mishpatim, he said, okay, I'm going to do a mitzvah now, which is really educationally a fantastic idea. And finally, Umi Yitain, doesn't that sound like a human being? And the answer is yes. Because once HaKadosh Baruch Hu limited himself from suspending our Bechira Chavshus, or from telling us how to be, all he's left with is hoping and davening, Kiviyachol, and willing us to be tzaddikim, because that's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants. All right, that's it for this week. Yashkach to everybody. Bli neder. See you next week.